Before we get started, obviously, Brad and Nikki gave us about 38 seconds to talk about ourselves. So, start the clock. Here we go. My name's Chad Scott. I'm one of the account executives here at ISSA Kentuckiana. I live here locally. Been around Lincoln about 15 to 20 years. Got off week 10. Got off week 10 is what we did back in the day. Real quick for Guy Security, we're a 15-year-old national company with regional presence. We specialize in cybersecurity only solutions, right? We got two facets. First facet is value-added reselling, and we truly believe in the added value of that value added. Tool evaluation, tool consolidation, which is really hot right now, consolidating on the tool set, and managing those vendors, right? We represent over 760 cybersecurity vendors right now. Vetted. Managing people like Sean over there, we'll take care of you on that. That's one angle of what we do with GuidePoint and Mystery Club.
Thank you, Chad. It's good to be here. I'm back. I've seen a lot of familiar faces, some new. So again, thanks to Matt for hosting this space. So what else does GuidePoint do? So we come with consulting. We come with experts, the deep technical bench, application security. We've actually just rolled DevSecOps and cloud security under that practice. It is led by one Mr. Robert Darwin, who lives in Louisville, so a fellow Louisvillian. He was supposed to be here today, but got tied up in something else. So we'll do it the next one. Then again, cloud security rolls up under that. GRC, of course, identity access management. Significant number of breaches these days, credentials compromised. So this is probably one of our most rampant growing practices, the IAM. Incident response, DFIR, threat intelligence, and of course, the PAS, the threat attack simulation. We'll talk a little bit more, obviously, about that space as well. Managed security services, a lot of different flavors of this. It's the the ad as a service, you've got fully managed. You own the tool. Our experts run that for you. We have a co-managed offering, so it's a joint effort between both teams, and that works for a lot of different customers. We've got staff augmentation, obviously, if you need a body for a certain project. So those are areas in the managed space that we can cover. And you can see that MDR, EDR, all the fun happening. So that is GuidePoint in a nutshell. Would love to talk to you guys. Again, we see a lot of familiar faces. Chad's been here for a couple of years. Obviously, does a phenomenal job in getting our brand out there. So yeah, we can't wait. Hopefully, he'll join us at 5 Iron Golf here after the lunch. I will shut up now. We're going to pass it over to our principal security architect, Mr. Furey, DiDomenico. In the North Central region here, and he's going to help walk you through a really good topic. I think hence the sold out crowd. So Furey.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's a bit of a blessing that Darwin couldn't make it. Today's the first day of spring break in Florida, and I got to fly to Kentucky yesterday to spend the first day with you all. You take that as you will, but I'm counting it as a win for me. I've included here the abstract. You should have seen this on Eventbrite and such, but for those of you who hadn't, the intent today is really to walk you through from GuidePoint Security's vulnerability management practice and what we have seen out in the wild with customers, any sort of friction points, issues that they run into, things that we often find ourselves helping them out with, and not just the technical aspects of it when we're talking about program delivery and actually operationalizing vulnerability management data. That's where that's what a lot of these vendors are trying to solve when they come to you with these new tool sets. What the intent today is to also show you, hey, it's not just tools, it's also your processes have to mature with your tooling. Myself, I am based in Central Florida. So I was a customer with GuidePoint for many years, and I came on as an employee once I saw what was really kind of going on under the hood. I believe in the organization. Now I'm into my 5th year there. So it's been a lot of fun for me, and I've been getting some great opportunities to talk with so many different people around the country like you all. So I get really excited for that. Plus I'm remote, and I don't really see a whole lot of other coworkers and such. So going to conferences and coming out to events is really a lot of fun for me. If I'm not in Central Florida, working as staff at B-Sides Orlando, you'll find me volunteering out at HackerCon. So if you see me out at Black Hat, DEF CON, or anything like that, you see me, you say, hey, Furey, I'll absolutely stop and have a conversation with you. So the agenda for today, this is an all ages show. So where this is I'm talking through exact like scenarios that we have seen, and some of them are where organizations are in that crawling stage of vuln management all the way up to where they're run. So the agenda for today is really, we're going to cover the basics first. And this is kind of the what an organization typically looks like compartmentalized. And then we're going to expand from there and go through a capability maturity model integration. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. And we're going to talk how we use that to make our assessment on the program as a whole, and then how we can continue to drive improvements through vulnerability management program. We're going to talk about the risk-based vulnerability management. I'm sure you've had a lot of sales pitches around that from a bunch of different vendors. I am going to show you some numbers, some financial numbers around this, where we've been able to qualify savings for the vulnerability management teams for our customers. And also talk about, some pros and cons of streamlining that and getting the data ready to go into risk-based vulnerability management. Then into reporting outputs and what we've seen work, what doesn't really seem to get too much traction, but we get a lot of requests for. And then where we've seen other solutions excel in their own right by being able to manage the vulnerability management assessment data afterwards. So not necessarily selecting the right tooling for the entire enterprise, not necessarily just for VM. And then we'll go into CTEM, which has been a whole lot of fun in the past year and a half. We're going on 2 years at this point. I'll touch briefly on continuous threat and exposure management and things to look out for. So just to be clear, I'm speaking about our practice in this region, in this North Central region, in your region. These are other customers from here that we support. These are just kind of a day in the life of what we've seen in vulnerability management. I will not be plugging vendors. This is not a sales slide. The closest thing I will come to a sales slide is this next one, where it will show you just what we do on our side. And it's really just to provide context as to what our customers can select and where we're coming from as a provider in the VMAS space. So diving right in. So these are the different offerings that we have. We have the VM program development to engineering support, integration and automation, and VM as a service. This isn't necessarily a unique looking slide. However, one of the pieces that the section with VM program development, which is unique, is we commonly perform VM health checks. And sure, that's a technology space and where we're doing an assessment of whatever your tech stack is for your vulnerability assessments. We also look at any sort of pitfalls or issues obtaining that data, rationalizing that data, ensuring that the assessment data, the criteria for the assessment was correct, that the assessment findings are as accurate and you have confidence. We're trying to give confidence in this data as much as possible. We all know vuln management is not without its own issues. However, where we have a unique play in this is we're looking across all of the tools in the stack, where in other providers you may see they're only specializing in certain tech stacks for your health checks. And we use that to really identify any sort of gaps between looking at policy program and to how that turns into a transaction for your security personnel in your organization. So this is really on a high level. So I'm going to touch on some engineering support, integration, and automation, and then not really as a service, because I'm not selling a service today, but it's just in there because it's a slide and I didn't want to take it out. Also, if you have any questions for me, I got a couple pillars in my way, but I'll do my best. I'll give a couple seconds after the end of each slide and just look, you could just raise your hand. And I just ask that I'm tethered kind of to this, so I'm going to have to repeat your question. So I'm going to come over to you and then come back. So those of you that are on the call, if I'm going to gather a question, I'll repeat it when I come back. Let's go. So we're going to dive right into kind of, this is what has traditionally always been management. Vulnerability management is really assessment and prioritization. It is an audit function. It primarily is responsible for prioritizing patch management. It operates independently, so patch management itself will operate independently. So that's right there. That's a one friction point right there for your security team, is they have to go to somebody else to begin with. And your patch management teams are oftentimes subjected to other SLAs or job requirements for success criteria by their supervisors, aside from taking on vuln management tasks. Ideally, your patch management's proactive, meaning there is a life cycle management. There's an expected cadence to updates, not just say for just doing software updates, but also talking about firmware on your IoT, OT devices, firmware on your network devices as well. So what we're really hoping to see when we go into organizations is that it's not just like Windows update, but we also have, other solutions in there, and they have a program and a process to update that network equipment, the network gear as well. And just understanding, hey, how many times a year are you doing firmware revisions and such? And this is all going to come more into play as we get further through the slide decks. And then reactive patching. So as security says, hey, you should patch, they take that in and they prioritize it, but they're also prioritizing it generally against what their success criteria is for their job. Configuration management as well. This is where we're monitoring, looking for services that shouldn't be running or are running or are insecure. The benefits for configuration management right out of the gate is it can reduce the footprint of your attack surface if you have unnecessary services running. This is just common practices that we're talking about. We're in the crawl stage of VM management right now. And then further, it reduces that load for patches that are required. If you're now patching a service, it's actually not a risk at that point, so it shouldn't go on to any sort of remediation response at that point. So you're really cleaning up a lot of waste in your processes there by having both of these in place. This is not often the case when we come and look at customers. Loan management programs are usually struggling in one, two, or all of these areas. So I'm going to also start off with, hey, this is kind of what a loan management program starts out with from an org chart. Very, very simple. I've seen this so many times over the years. The issue here is that when we say, hey, we're kicking off a vuln management program, just as I touched with patch and configuration, is this is not the actual vuln management program staff. These are the people that are transacting in assessment technology. So if you're at, say, the security analysts here, and you have your leadership come and say, hey, I got budget, we're going to get that tool that you've been talking about. We're no longer just doing nmap scans and you're doing sed grep and awk to parse out that data. We're putting on our big boy pants and we're getting a real tool. And that analyst is fantastic. That is going to save me so much time. And largely that's true. However, it's going to cost you elsewhere when you take this approach. And this is really kind of my messaging to the security analysts that are out there, that if you're taking on vuln management, it's much more than just the transaction and the technology. So we've got our vuln management team. We have our technology deployed. Our analyst is in there. We've got architecture squared away. We've got scanners as close to the targets as possible. We're minimizing traversing network boundaries to obtain assessment data. And we are also now responding to ISSA Kentuckiana. And this is old news. However, the reason why I come back, we always find ourselves coming back to this, is that ISSA is table stakes in loan management. I've had customers leadership go, oh yeah, we've got this. We respond to ISSA. I go, okay, what's your turnaround times? What are your SLAs around ISSA? And that can vary depending on the organization. And ISSA this is a known database of exploited vulnerabilities in the wild. Like this, if you went to your executive leadership and said, hey, I had this database, it's free, I could have leveraged this on my risk metrics, but didn't, that's probably not going to be a good conversation going forward, because ISSA, it's in all the mainstream enterprise solutions as well. The database is also free. So if you just want to go grab the Excel or the JSON from, from ISSA, then you can actually roll your own solution. A lot of the metrics that I even have in here are I just did some pivot tables out of ISSA to show you kind of that demand, which is makes it a little easier to rationalize, because if you say, hey, we are responding to ISSA, and you look at these numbers here from 2001 all the way through 2005, if you count these vulnerabilities, that seems a lot more manageable than when you're looking at just a complete dump of your CVEs that are in your environment. It seems manageable at first. It is a great win. This is like baseline though. Like if you're coming with ISSA there, it's not without its limitations. One, it's from the context of the US government. So you're not going to see other contexts of, say, other nation states. And then also it's slower than, say, threat intelligence feeds. So it tends to lag a little bit. So what we're seeing is threat intelligence starts to see activities in, say, GitHub projects or elsewhere in other repositories. And excuse me. We'll look at the other repositories and make an assessment from there. Basically what I put in here was just really about the binding operational directive. If you're unfamiliar with this, the links are in the presentation as well. And then you can always talk to me afterwards if you have any questions. All right. So diving into the capability maturity model integration. So these are, this is some of the framework that we use when we're performing assessments of vulnerability management programs. I know that, some people can have a love-hate relationship with SCMMI. The point being on this one is, as long as you have a framework for improving your vulnerability management program and assessing it and improving it. It could be CMMI, it could be NIST 803, it could be ISO 27001, NIST cybersecurity framework. We kind of use an amalgamation of all of these things when we're performing our assessments. It really depends on the customer's level of maturity before how far deep into the weeds we have to go. Where we are right now in this example is, we're doing our initial scanning and visibility. So we have our CISO, security manager, and a security analyst. We're finally doing scans. We got the tech stack. I've got this data. So I'm not really sure what I've got out there. And now I'm seeing it for the first time. Now I'm going through that process of trying to rationalize who owns the data. Do I have an inventory? Is the inventory reliable? Is the inventory contextualized? How many inventories? So if your network team, your app team, your infrastructure team, your cloud teams, they can all have separate inventories. And that puts your analysts in an interesting position, because they've consolidated all the inventories inadvertently. And it becomes even more challenging as that standalone vulnerability analyst, because you're not only managing that technology, now you're also managing processes that are not really in your control at all. Moving forward, going to level 2 and a managed, and I'm not going to go through each of these, but I'm going to go just kind of where we are in this state. And then moving into level 2 is really where you start moving into it. It's a regulatory framework. Your scans have already been vetted. There's confidence in the data that's coming out. It's more of a, you're moving into a scheduled scan cycle. You're potentially getting agent data if you deploy agents, and you're starting to actually see what is going on across the enterprise. You're able to, from that point, to understand what that work output's going to take. This is when you start either integrating with your ticket management solutions, or you're starting to try to stumble through in some cases. How am I going to get remediation to these? How do I get these requests out the door? And how is this going to be actionable and measurable? How do you do that is, first, we need to identify the actual staff in the vulnerability management program. Right here. This can expand, this can contract. The important thing here is that this is the context of, this is the talent that you need for success in your VM program. Can you spot the candidate for burnout? Anybody want to take a guess? It's that security analyst down there, because that security analyst now is inadvertently agreed by saying, oh yeah, I'm finally getting out of the scripts and doing these manual testing. I get an automated enterprise. This is going to be fantastic. I have all this data. And they're gonna be like, well, I just paid all this money for this tool. How am I operationalizing this data? Well, I'm going to send an email over to the infrastructure manager and the apps manager and the information services manager, and that disappears into inbox hell. And then even going laterally, say that the security analyst happens to be, have a great rapport with everybody across the organization, is able and comfortable to go in and say, hey, this needs to get fixed. You're not graded for it, but I am. That's a common problem that we've experienced, our friction point. However, what that can do is it can demotivate your analysts in a lot of ways to community. It's like, this is obvious to me. However, it's really up to that security manager, the CISO, and that leadership when we talk about that top-down approach for security that we've been talking about it for 20 some odd years. And there's still a struggle with human communications across the aisles to these other areas. And a lot of times when we come in and we'll do our health check, we'll sit with a security analyst and go, oh, technology looks great. Why are these remediations not happening? Why aren't you hitting SLAs? And then they're going, oh, well, I create this list, I send it over. Sometimes they get to it, sometimes they don't. And, or patch management is so slow. They can't actually patch this stuff. So though that you're building business cases for resources at this point. And that's one of the challenges there, is because you're going in and you're seeing stuff you've never seen before. And now you're in a reactive state because you're expected that return on investment, but you haven't even gotten a remediation yet because you haven't really figured out how to distribute that consistently. And then does everybody have confidence in your new tool? I know that, if we're putting up a new application, or if we're standing up an entire new platform, a lot more goes into that than say, hey, I've got some scans, here's some results, and here you go. There is a bit of politicking. There's a little bit of grandstanding there. And there's a lot of showing the data to all parties involved and getting buy-in. You're building a user story for automation by doing this too. So if you understand what everybody needs in all of these different silos, you write these decision points down when you're going through and performing these interviews with staff, and you're building your business case for ticketing workflows into your ITSM. You may not have it like immediately. It's just getting to trying to push to pie in the sky, which we'll get to. However, that really needs to be championed across leadership and management more than by a security champion that's functioning in attack or functioning in an adjacent technology. Another thing that's really important I don't see in policies often, and it shouldn't be in policy. However, it should go in your program. If you don't have a program document for vulnerability management or your run book, go look at your infrastructure team, go look at your app team, go look at what they're doing. You could at least follow the standard at that point and build out your run books and your programs and the transactions so everybody understands what's going on. But specifically about roles and responsibilities, because if we go back to the sheet where I had the entire organization there, this actually breaks down what people are supposed to be doing in that vulnerability management program. So when your analyst is talking to the database administrator, he's going, well, I don't know how I'm going to get this done. This isn't on my docket for this month, but now you're saying it's here. What am I supposed to do? Refer to this. This is the RACI for this, and communicate that down. It shouldn't be in policy because it's not a policy. Your policy is largely crafted for all of your employees of an organization. It's typically fairly broad for the most part, and then it starts whittling down depending on the areas that you're operating within an organization. Same is true for vulnerability management because it evens out, it manages everybody's expectations of who's going to do what. Again, this has to be leadership driven, not analyst or administrator driven. So now we're really into level 2 at this point. We're trying to move further into level 2. So we're looking for a regulatory framework. We've got, as I said, scans going, scan to patch life cycle. So if my patch management program is running, vuln scans are coming in, am I chasing those SLAs? Are those SLAs lining up? Are they doing what they said they're going to do? We have some emerging processes. We're discovering these processes as we're passing off the vulnerabilities to the other teams for analysis and vetting. And then we're also looking even further at analysis and prioritization. So for the majority where we see our customers, getting from like a level 1 to a level 2 seems to be like a natural progression as more data becomes available to them. And I'm not saying any of these things with any sort of intention of fault. This is just like typical kind of grassroots, build it up, have the tooling, and now we're based on the data that we're getting, we are responding and react to that data. So some measured metrics, we're trying to move to some sort of defined governance. So now I'm going to move into the benefits of now taking a risk-based approach. So we had our scans, we looked at ISSA. We've got ISSA is now being addressed. Now I have all this other scan data, all the any of the criticals, highs, and where they reside in the network. At that point, you know, we should probably be looking at some sort of framework if we have frameworks involved at that point. We're looking to adopt one, so at least we can have a frame of reference to provide to anybody who's out on the outside looking in. The vulnerability management also has kind of like this transparency problem that people don't really understand. It's a bit like ephemeral, like what's going on behind the scenes? What are you all really doing? Like, how does this mean? And like, how am I getting all this great data, but nobody's taking action? Moving to a risk-based service level agreements, you can now take and contextualize that risk. So if you look on the image to the right there, your domain controllers, a network server, or a client workstations, this is where you're actually building your business risk in, because I use simple, comprehensible examples as domain controllers, network server, client workstations. It could be application cloud platforms. It could be any number of ways that your business is dependent on these tech stacks and what that impact would be if there was an outage or they got ransomware. The big thing around setting SLAs is they have to be attainable by your organization. If you're setting an SLA, so say you're looking at your patch management team and they're saying, we're going to patch, I'll have it 90 days after release. We'll be at 100% patch. Go look. And if it's not there, okay. It's technical debt. That's another conversation entirely to say, hey, look, the inventory isn't matching like the life cycle management that you're telling me that we're performing. So is this true or is this not? When I go into an organization on this, we always start with, we're going to measure what you say you were doing. And then we're going to see, are there any sort of issues, extenuating circumstances there, or variances that are undocumented? And then moving forward, you include the roles and responsibilities of the entire team that supports the program. So all of the prioritization now is you prioritize your inventory, which in itself is often a pretty gargantuan task. It can be. I've seen some organizations actually use their volume management solution as their inventory. I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. Just understand that if you're have like a bucket of hours for volume management, don't take asset inventory out of that bucket. Make sure that analyst has enough resources to perform the asset management portions as well. Okay. This is where we performed a case study with one of our customers. These are one of the earlier adopters of RBVM technology. And at the end of the day, we were able to reduce the amount of vulnerabilities that the VM team was responding to. So if we're looking at risk reduction, we're looking at the highest risks in the environment. So coming from a perspective of CVSS, criticals highs, that's typically, you'll cut tickets for that out of the gate. Things go onto KEV, those also get new tickets. However, the exploitable vulnerabilities that come out and they're being exploited in the wild, that's the stuff you really want your EMT looking at. You want your team looking at the KEV. You want them focused on that. And if we go back to, I won't on the slide, but my previous slides where I had the KEV and it was kind of the times, you can go through and say, oh, it's about 30 minutes to cut a ticket for each of these vulnerabilities. And so through a lot of our automation practices in VM, we've also done a lot of interviews, and to cut a vulnerability management ticket, generally everybody kind of is consensus of about 30 minutes. If I'm doing it manually, it's going to take that much time for me to get it in my tool, get it out, rationalize it, confirm that inventory is for who it is, and then I'm routing a ticket or an email properly. Is this really a vulnerability? Is a false positive? And then all of that assessment goes into that ticket. So when you're looking at doing a CVSS based, 600,000 vulnerabilities at $80 an hour, and then it's a half hour per vulnerability. You see the cost qualifies to $24 million, and nobody has that in their budget to cut tickets like that. And then that's why we talk about, hey, if we're going to manually cut tickets, do it by the vulnerability, or do it by the remediation steps. So if you and you see this a lot out there in some tooling, but a lot for your manual shops, we definitely recommend you're going to start just going by the KEV, and then all of the additional information, all those other CVSS criticals and highs are still being addressed, but they're being addressed by the remediation teams. We already know at that point that they're vulnerable. Another point around, or we already know that they're working to remediate the vulnerabilities because the process is in place. Move it off to those teams that are going to be patching and doing the configuration changes. Over on the right, you can see that all published CVEs. So of all the CVEs, 3.2% had exploit activity. So that's really the case there of, hey, if we're looking at all of these and cutting tickets for all of these, this is the cost of the organization that may have, that's more than likely not going to have a lot of value compared to addressing the stuff that is risk-based. So far, we're only using KEV. We haven't even gotten to threat intelligence or any other enrichment sources. But you can see also, CVEs on the KEV, right? They're observed at the org 61%. If you look at the next chart, I mean, that right there tells you or starts to paint that story of like just kind of overall, this is the stuff that we should be focusing on. And this is the feel good story about the KEV, right? This is where if we go into organizations, they say we're doing KEV, so we're fantastic. No, you're good, and that's fantastic. But let's see if you're doing KEV. Again, we measure. Any questions around that? Cool.
Do you see organizations using change?
So the question is, have we seen change control leveraged in the vulnerability management programs for remediation? And the answer to that is yes, if we're looking at configuration compliance in particular. So if I'm addressing that, the whole thing. So yeah, change controls generally around configuration compliance. So if they're like making configuration changes to servers and workstations or images for VMs, et cetera, yeah, that typically goes through a change control. I've seen it to where we've had to sit and present and change controls of what we're doing for vulnerability management too. And it really depends on regulations and what that organization's appetite is for, you know, their change control process and such. Generally from a VM, like in a VM practice perspective, we see a change control as a change control process, not a VM process. So even though the change control process is the remediation activities dependent upon the change control process, we should be able to bake that into risk at that point. So, you know, hey, this is vulnerable this month. I'm not going to even be able to get this change control in for, you know, a week or 2 weeks. Then you can start forecasting as well. That's great. You can do it for vulnerability management as well. However, it depends on the depth and the breadth of the remediation. So if it's for patching or anything like that, if it's a huge patch, it's going to have massive implications. You're probably going to stage it and have, you know, a rollout and gently move into that space. So yeah, it depends at that point on the organization. If the vulnerability management activities have been adopted as more of like a business as usual, meaning, oh, we know this has already been on the network doing this stuff. We usually see like a change control template you would make that if you had to document the month's activities, just make a template and just keep plugging that in and updating from there. It's where if you're relying on the change control process. Correct. So in that, what I've seen in my experiences with CAB when we're doing kind of like, we're trying to get this in and say, look, this is just what we're doing going forward. We'll do this initial change and say, hey, here's go live and all this. And from that point on, this should be a standard process. Here's everything for go live, but here's everything for what we're doing for our monthly operations.
So your change control is so you already
Correct. Yeah, and largely that will be true. Your risk metrics, however, we don't see risk necessarily translate into change controls often, or even ticketing, depending on the integrations of the data that they want. So it can be limiting. It can be limiting, and it also can be enough. So it really depends, going back to the user stories for everybody, on what their requirements are to take action against a vulnerability. Thank you for the questions. It was awesome. So really at the end of the day, because we've now moved off all those critical vulnerabilities, if we have an integration with IPAM to where you can get these inventories, you can start hunting these additional inventories down. This is really what we're doing, is giving the vulnerability management staff space to continue to drive the risk down in your organization, continue to adapt new processes, technologies, to giving them space to do the research on these things. And then at the end of the day, with the processes and responsibilities in place, if an emergency or a significant issue comes up, you don't have to worry about the processes, so you don't have to jump as much. Was anybody working for Log4j? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. So I was my RVM teams. What are we going to do? We're just going to go ahead and look at the scan data to see that we already had to see if there's Log4j data in to start, and then just kick off the scans. And what could have been an emergency was largely covered because the processes had already compensated for a lot of things. We were hunting outliers. We weren't hunting things that were known. We were looking for unknown because that was already in the inventories, and that was already tickets that were already cut for them. So it definitely can help you drive preparations. So now we're looking more into analysis and prioritization. So now we're pushing into level 3. So getting from level 3, typically we see from level 3 to get to level 4 is usually where you have a resource investment from the organization, because this is where you're getting to the point where you've got some business context, light business context as I evidence. And then you also have most of your processes established. So, and then if your patching is coming back within their SLAs and even within, say, a vulnerability response SLA, you're getting into a better state, and you're actually preparing yourself for automation through the user stories, through change controls, ticketing on this. You're building out the entire stories and all the technical data that you need for automation. Give them measurable processes. They may not be entirely complete. And then you're looking at emerging metrics and trends. Other things that I just want to talk about when we're talking about analysis and prioritization is you need to show your work. And what I mean by that is if you're putting up slides of your other colleagues in other areas of expertise, and you're saying, hey, you missed this, hey, you missed this, hey, you missed this, put up your own management technical help and say, hey, look, we're still at like 86% authentication rate. We're still working on this stuff. This stuff's like, you have to be fairly transparent, to be as transparent as any of these other teams have to be with their service delivery. That's my recommendation. A lot of times we don't see that, where when we talk about dashboards and reports, it's all risk-based, but we aren't actually reporting on operational health of the security tools that we're using. How many people have like their operational health of their VM tools and say your monthly scorecard or your reports? Say, hey, these many scans completed successfully. This is where we are with authentication. Those things are valued to track, because those are leading indicators of a technology issue, a resource issue at the end of the day, and that can help you get ahead of making a decision or asking for more budget, or talk about what changes need to occur if the organization wants these things to be accounted for, compensated for, or be a part of this program. So now we're moving into, we've pulled together patch management and configuration management, and now we're looking at attack surface management as well. And this can blend into a bit of can be synonymous with, say, asset management. So when we start looking at attack surface management, a lot of times it's an inventory first. And depending on the tool that you're using, you are subjected to somebody else's opinion of what your inventory is online. So that can be challenging. So if you're looking at tools that are just going to take a snapshot and take a look at your environment periodically and then give you a score and then update it, that can be very valuable for some organizations. However, it can also be particularly challenging for your vulnerability management staff, because you can't get a rescan. You can't get any updated data. So you're at the mercy of whenever that tool updates. Additionally, with sort of that attack surface management and then asset management, we start to see it lean not from more from an asset management perspective than attack surface monitoring, as we become more dependent on agents and agent data that's reporting back. or active queries from OT. Additionally, we're now layering in continuous penetration testing or breach attack simulation services. That is also driven by your vulnerability management practice. You get your pen test results come in. Go, hey, can I confirm that these are in my vulnerability management tool? Yes, no, it's no. That goes on your health report to say, hey, we have an attribution problem or something with our tooling. And then you've got to check for the integrity of the data, and it's really building confidence with those outputs as well. And then at that point, you can start and I mean, actually even beforehand, but these are the areas that we see friction points to where a customer is able to move their program into automation. So now I'm going to talk about data strategy, and when we go in and we're bringing on a customer, first thing we do is, do you have an inventory? This is one of the most loaded, heavy, unanswered questions that we commonly get. Do you have an actual inventory? And it's, yeah, I've got this. Is it in a spreadsheet or is it in a tool? And it doesn't matter, because is somebody watching that? And it's typically not. There has been, I have seen some CMDBs that were pristine, Fed. I've never seen a pristine CMDB outside of Fed. However, when you're going through and we're determining where vulnerability management data can exist in the enterprise, we look across all the different types of assessment data. And this is really important when you're looking at your entire organization, because vulnerability assessment data may exist in your enterprise that you're not aware of. So say any sort of shadow IT, or say your developers are now, they put in their own CI/CD scanner to help block, or it's really kind of like shadow cybersecurity, not just shadow IT. And the importance of getting ahead of that and understanding where it exists is you're going to have to say, this is what this organization's using, and you have to condemn that data that you're not going to use. Because, and you get buy-in from everybody, and that's not a one-person decision either. You need to get all leadership to make this choice. What are we using? And you're going to find that being a challenge when you start looking at different RBVM tools and threat intelligence. So if you look at some cloud native security applications out there, they bolt things on, or they'll use some additional tools, and you're getting some data in there. And there may be an ad hoc process that's in there that can you rely on that data or not? And if you can't, you should condemn it, especially if you're getting multiple threat intelligence and you can't necessarily rationalize or make a decision on, hey, this isn't even like what we've been talking about doing in our program. And suddenly I've got data from our Zscaler SASE. They added Avalor for their vulnerability management solution. And that's not a plug. I'm not plugging any technology on this. I'm just using it as a quick example that I had in my head from SASE. So, but this data does show up, and you'll see it in specifically like in Azure, because Azure does bundle a container scanner. And that's actually Qualys. It was a watered down version of Qualys. And you'll see your infrastructure people or your AppSec people, they're still running these scans. They're still getting data, and they're potentially actioning on that data internally before you even see it or anybody else sees it downstream. But the biggest part of that is you don't want to be in a position to say, I had this data and I didn't action on it. And that's why it's really important to be transparent again with your vulnerability operations. Just be transparent and drive the decisions up. So we have identified all the assessment data that we're going to need. Now we're going to go ahead and look at vulnerability data consolidation and enrichment. And this is where we're looking at RBVM tools. And the idea here is that you're taking all the vulnerability data, assessment data from all those different hosts, putting it in one location. It gets centralized management, deduplicated, enriched, you put threat intelligence on top of it. You can stack your business risk on top of that as well. And then from that RBVM, UVM tool, you have that picture of your risk, and now you're ready to potentially push that into your ITSM or Jira, ServiceNow, GitHub, whatever. And so the last piece is operationalizing the data. And this should have already been in place before we even got to the point with RBVM, is we already know what acceptance, exception, remediation, or mitigation is, what those operations look like, what is expected, those data outputs to be delivered for that action to take place. And then we're measuring against our service level agreements. And I say here, get it over to IT service management. The message here is really, we see more success in remediation when you're getting the remediation request closer to where the work actually happens. So if we're talking about cutting tickets out of, say, a Tenable or a Qualys or anything like that, you're still, going through that manual process, getting it out of the actual VM tooling, because you're going to train people on that and they're not going to remember to go onto it. And it's and other duties sort of activity. So really getting it to where the work is done, we see that tends to net better results, because SLAs are generally managed in here. Your managers are generally looking in there to understand, what their deficiencies are in their own resources. At that point, we're not measuring risk. We're just measuring services. So put it where the services are measured. Get your security personnel in there too. They should have already been in there taking tickets for vulnerabilities as they come up. Any questions? We're getting kind of close on time. So I'm going to go pretty quick through the next couple of slides. So now we're moving it. I'm going to move us into reporting and some of the struggles with that, going into that transparency. So a lot of times we're build custom reports into, say, a statement of work, and we can build a couple standard, but a lot of our customers tend to not even really use those once we show them dashboards and what they can do with dashboarding. The great thing about dashboarding is you can take, if you built one dashboard, and now you can build a similar dashboard, one for your CISO, one for your security manager, one for your app team, one for your infrastructure team. And then that's all contextualized to their realm of influence. And building that out and having it easily exportable can be fantastic for the dashboards. However, my bullets are going beyond the tech there when I'm saying contextualize the data for the audience. So if you're delivering own data through tickets or inboxes to analysts, that's one thing. But if you're delivering it to management, make sure you have those contexts in place that are relevant to the managers that are responsible in those areas. And don't forget to report on your VM health. Always report on your VM health. Eat your frog too. Limit the use of static point in time reports. The data is stale by the time it's in the inbox. You could export a dashboard. I've actually had analysts go, no, they like this. We're just going to export it, and I'm going to plug it into this PowerPoint that goes out the door. And there may be better options in your enterprise elsewhere. I've seen enterprises just dump all their vuln data and inventory data into a data lake and then just use Power BI and let their IT, or GRC, or whoever just go in and grab the data that they want. And that really becomes, you start to feel, as your vuln management program matures, you stop feeling so much like an analyst, more like a data custodian. And you're just making sure that the data is getting to where it goes. And largely it should at this point, and you should be pushing it automatically out to ticketing, to those remediation teams, to free up your VM team from, there shouldn't be judgment calls at that point. It's that this is the process, we're following this process. Again, if you're doing it manually, consider grouping it by effort and say, like, hey, this patch is going to take care of all of these, or this configuration change is going to take care of all of that. Try to, because when you're not cutting tickets individually, you're cutting one, you're trying to qualify value, because you're not really in like a strict process yet, but you are trying to qualify value of the findings. And then, as I touched, keep all the performance and resource measurements around your IT services where it belongs, like where it's intended to be. So if you keep security tickets in a separate silo, as a lot of organizations do, your vuln data and that's automated, probably not going to want that so much kept in that silo because you just need resources to respond. Additionally, yeah, your risk metrics, keep them in your vuln management tool or in the GRC tool. Like let the tools that are built to measure risk do the work. Do the tools that are measured for SLAs, let their do. I've just not seen any of these vuln management programs lump in reporting, dashboarding, and ticketing and projects across everything yet in a way that made anybody happy. Mostly it leaves people wanting, and they're not too thrilled with it after they start digging inside the data. So now we're all the way up to level 4, and then we're starting to look at level 5. Yeah, like 5 minutes. Am I okay to keep going? We got like, are we good on time? All right, cool. So this is where I'm going to start talking about continuous threat and exposure management. The biggest thing I am going to champion here about this is that it's a program, it's not a product. And if we have a lot of solutions that are coming to market that say they're saying they're a CTEM solution, and our practice, we've been trying to determine, you know, hey, we're going to go the CTEM route, because for us it's kind of all of these different things that I listed rolled into one. But if we're going the CTEM route, what technology are we going to, as GuidePoint, what are we going to say that we're going all in on? And the answer is we're just not quite there yet. We haven't seen any of the tech do completely what is promised in CTEM. But the visibility side of things is improving greatly. So the idea with CTEM is that you're now, it's a lot of similar processes to kind of that traditional vuln management program. However, you're identifying and you're defining these assets, environments, and the attack surface that's going to be monitored. So it's you already have this inventory. Like I said, it's in the technology we've looked at, it's largely been agent-based for CTEM because there is a response component in CTEM. Having that identified critical assets, your attack surface and security risks, which we've already done, moving into now discovery. This is where we're doing continuous scans. So we're not doing point in time. We're just as they go, we continue to perform these scans. And then your prioritization is where we assess the rank and threats and exposures based on the potential impact and exploitability. Again, it's not a big change from what I've shown from just what we see in vuln management. And then validation, continually test and validate security controls and defenses. And that's where, combined with attack surface management, with the VM program, that continuous scanning, now we're layering in that penetration testing as well for that continued surface test and mobilization. And this is the part that is where things get sticky, because some solutions that you're looking for CTEM are going to claim that you can patch directly from your vuln management console, and you can do that. However, operationally, is that something that is that a place you want to be? And is that a place you want to put that lonely vuln analyst back in like slide 5 that hasn't communicated to everybody, that's stuck now communicating with everybody too? So the mobilization piece, where we're finding challenging, is because most of our customers struggle with patch management and configuration management. Mobilization's intended to make it more effective. However, if we're addressing patches in a DMZ outside of a change control, so CTEM demands that. CTEM says, okay, you have this on the network perimeter, it's exposed, it's vulnerable, and then here are these other toxic combinations within the DMZ that if this gets popped, we can start moving laterally across network boundaries. that's still going to be a challenge. That's not like a new struggle. It's better because we have better visibility and control because we can say, hey, we just patched this. We're going to kill this kill chain and we can keep moving back and you can scale your remediation values to be the most effective. So just kind of closing this out. So from a vulnerability response, it's operational. So you need to make sure you support lateral communications and operations. You do that with transparency. I mean, you've got to show that your stuff can stink from time to time too, and it will. And it's really important that you show that so people can identify problems or resource constraints, or somebody may have an idea or because they see it that, oh, well, we put in this change control last month. I'll just put this change control in because I didn't see this. And then you have, oh, well, that's great. I already have it remediated within our life cycle. Erasing, you need clear roles and responsibilities and expectations. This is the biggest thing. Like, you can do all that, but it's really about expectations. And so nobody's getting surprised when somebody says, this is vulnerable, and nobody should be surprised by the response. No, you should be surprised by the categorization or the prioritization, and it should have already been in a ticket. Security champions, reward them, and not Little Caesar's pizza party. I'm not wrong. Governance and policy, and a lot of my presentation's been about governance. You have to set attainable service levels so you're not out of the gate already condemning somebody for doing a poor job. That's a great way to make friends, by the way, and that will jumpstart your career. And set a start date and scope for compliance. So if you're saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and do ISSA Kev, and we're going to set this new response level at 7 days, run a mock on what happened last month. Go back a couple of months and see what that would really take to get those efforts in place. And then through those mock kind of tabletop exercises, you can start building from there what expectations should be, what we're actually getting, and why we're deficient or we're excelling. Push to prioritize by asset criticality and risk. This is important because this also helps you automate your risk reduction in the environment. Look at threat intelligence CTEM, look for that for remediation. And if we think we're safe with KEV, we're not. It's great, and it's been a game changer in a lot of organizations and for a lot of programs. However, there are still those limitations. Your data strategy, we're reducing the friction points. So if count the stops of your data from I have my tool, I touch asset management, that's live. This is a live asset. Now I'm making my assessment. Okay, this is everything that's come back. Do I need to look at configuration compliance as well? That comes back. Now at that point, do I touch the data? Because if I touch the data, friction point. How do I get that data out? You're actually not providing as much value as you think by manually cutting tickets 30 minutes at a time. And then inventory and classify all your VM data. And this is also particularly challenging and can even be grueling for a lot of organizations because of that disparate inventories. So that becomes more of an IT issue. And the recommendations there is, once again, take your user stories, all the data that your apps team, everybody that needs an inventory, what are their requirements for that data? Gather all that together, put that in your inventory. Hopefully it's not your vuln management tooling. And then reporting, standardize on dashboards and customize per audience. It's really just, you're trying to have the same look and feel. So it looks like the same report, but the data is more relevant and it's contextualized to the audience. And again, show your work every time, because that's your opportunity to say, well, I don't have budget for it, or we had pitched this and it got shot down, or, we had a riff and we never backfilled that position and I can't do all this stuff too. I mean, it's every bit as important to evidence your successes and your failures. And so you can do lessons learned. And with that, I mean, that's really all I have for you today. So once again, thank you. I will be at the golfing event too. If you guys want to hate on me for my PowerPoint smart art skills, I'll be in the corner after this. And then other than that, this was my first time to Louisville. So any recommendations, non-alcoholic, please. Things to see because I am actually gonna fly out tomorrow. So I got a little bit of time. And then finally, thank you. The contact information's here.